gentlemen. Before I begin, just let me start by wishing my deepest condolences to the family of Elazar Behar. When I heard of Elazar's passing, I had this impulse to come straight to Seattle. Of course, I couldn't do it, but I'm very glad to be here for the Corte de Mes de Shiloshim. When I heard of Elazar's passing, I was in my home in Brooklyn, and I was very shaken up by the news. It's not that I didn't know that Elazar was in his 90s and anything could happen at any time. It was more that from a very deep part of me, I identified Elazar with someone bigger than life, kind of a force of nature, somebody who we simply couldn't do without. How could there possibly be an Ezra Bessaroth without Elazar's warm smile, steady hand, and kind ways? I immediately called Dave when I heard the news to offer my condolences. We chatted for a few minutes, and when we were getting ready to hang up, I said, "You know, Dave, your father was one of my life mentors." I said this without thinking about it. It's just something that spontaneously popped out of my mouth. And I found myself repeating the same idea to many different people over the next few weeks. Yes, Elazar was one of my life mentors. I wasn't exactly sure why I said that, but I knew it was true. I thought it might have been the fact that I have known Elazar since I'm 6 years old. And he's been a lifelong friend and a role model for almost 60 years. I spent all of my formative years at the Ezra Bessaroth Synagogue in very close contact with Elazar. I reflected how he approached every task at the synagogue, big and small, with great alacrity, but especially I remember his shofar blowing, an energetic and inspiring sound that is imprinted on my mind till this day. It is simply a sound that took you into another world. The sound of Elazar's shofar is etched in my brain as the standard of what a shofar should sound like. And I had the good fortune over the past 2 Sundays, attending the Selichot services. David blew the shofar, and he sounded just like Elazar. I was very moved by the experience. With all of my initial reflections about Elazar's life, I still was not satisfied why I was calling him my mentor, although the reasons I gave you before are sufficient, but I wasn't satisfied. I felt there was something deeper going on. And this is something I would like to share with you this evening, and something which I hope sheds some light on Elazar's life and some of the lessons we can learn from it. There's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot under the name of Rabban Gamliel. And the Mishnah says, Chol ha'amelim im ha'sibur, yihyu amelim imahem l'shem shamayim. This means whoever does communal work needs to work for the public for the sake of heaven. The person in charge of public affairs needs to see beyond himself, to see the big picture, and recognize that he is a small part of the whole community. And all of his activities are not to better his own limited self, but for the betterment of the entire kahal. The person needs to realize that the goal of the synagogue is to serve God as a community, and not as a platform to express their own ideas or predispositions. Elazar, following the ancient tradition of Rabban Gamliel, was just such a leader, where the interests of the kahal were more important than the needs of any individual, including himself. He felt like he was part of something larger, always keeping his eye on the big picture. He operated l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. I'm going to recount to you a few stories this evening of personal experiences experiences I had with Elazar that illustrate this point, and for which I remain grateful till this day. A few years ago, not really, this is right after I turned bar mitzvah, Reverend Behar of blessed memory suffered a heart attack. Because of the Reverend's weakened condition, he could no longer attend the daily services. This was a big problem for the synagogue. In those days, nobody else was able to read the Sefer on Mondays and Thursdays. What to do? Of course, Elazar had a solution, and it involved me. One day in the synagogue, he pulled me over and said, "You just became bar mitzvah, and we need you to come and read the Sefer every Monday and Thursday." I was overwhelmed, to say the least. I couldn't believe he was asking me to do something so onerous. Every Monday and Thursday? With all of my homework? I won't have time to prepare. He answered, "I know it's going to be hard. I know it's a big commitment, but the call needs you. I know you can do it." It was not a request. Elazar was instructing me on my obligations to the Kahal, and my obligations superseded my own reservations. Elazar appealed to the better part of me that wanted to help. Indeed, I felt a sense of obligation to the Kahal, and I loved Reverend Behar and wanted to help. Plus, I was no match for Elazar when he had his mind made up. To make a long story short, I agreed to read the Sefer every week, and for 2 years, ages 13 and 14, I read every Monday and Thursday of the daily minyan. It was really hard preparing for the first few months, but over time I learned to enjoy it. And I was proud to be able to contribute to the Kahal. Elazar saw the potential in me and drew it out. All l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. He had his eye on the bigger picture. I'm going to tell you another incident that happened later in life, later from my bar mitzvah that is, but still almost 43 years ago. I had just gotten engaged to Vicky, and I was at home visiting my parents. As I left my parents' house on Wilson Avenue to go to the synagogue, I ran into Elazar, who was also on his way to college. So of course we walked together. He congratulated me on my engagement and told me what a great girl Vicky is, which I agreed with him then, and 42 years later I still agree with him, and how much he liked my in-laws and how he had known them forever. Then he asked me, "How are your studies going in the yeshiva? Do you intend on becoming a rabbi?" So I said, "Funny you should ask. I just received my semicha last week from Rabbi Ruderman of the Baltimore Yeshiva." Elazar stopped in his tracks, shocked. He said, "And you weren't going to tell me? I had to drag it out of you?" I explained that this was just a routine thing and not a big deal. Elazar looks at me again, shocked. He said, "What do you mean, not a big deal? Now our synagogue has produced 2 rabbis, your brother Mark, and now you. It's a source of pride for all of the Rodez Lees." When we arrived at the synagogue a few seconds later, Elazar made a big announcement about my semicha, and I saw his personal pride in my attaining the title of rabbi. It was a real lesson for me to see how Elazar viewed what I thought was a personal and routine achievement. Elazar saw the bigger picture and recognized that everybody in the Kahal played a role in my semicha. Again, l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. Each member of the Kahal contributes to the betterment of every other member. From then on, every time I would come to the synagogue, he would treat me with great honor and deference, always with a beam of pride in his smile. Finally, I'm going to share with you an observation made by my wife, Vicky. I asked her, "What's the most outstanding thing you remember about Elazar?" She thought about it for 1 second, and she said, "Oh, that's pretty easy. Every time after the services, when the Chazan Chazan was about to make Kiddush, Elazar would first turn to Cookie and give her a loving smile. And then he would turn and give a warm smile to the rest of the women. Vicky says it was as if Elazar was telling us, look, we've upheld our proud tradition once again. Isn't that amazing? Vicky said Elazar made the women feel drawn into the services. Again, this displays the same idea. Elazar's ability to see beyond himself and include as many as possible into the bosom of the Kahal. Indeed, Elazar personified the teaching of Rabban Gamliel. V'chol ha'amelim im hasibur, yihyu amelim imahem l'shem shamayim. Whoever labors on behalf of the public needs to do so for the sake of heaven. It is my prayer that we internalize this message of Elazar's mentorship as a guide for each of us. Elazar, we will miss you. May his memory serve as a source of comfort and inspiration to his family and the entire community. May the soul of our dear friend Elazar Behar be bound in the bond of eternal life. Amen.
Amen.
Now pass out the Mishnayot and the readings for the Mazal and the Shloshim that Linda has. That'll be followed by a Hadish. For all those in Hadish after the learning, page 485.